Hi and welcome. This is Richard, and welcome to the Conscious Marketer podcast. And I'm also joined by my co-host Kylie Slavek, and we are super excited to have Andrea Sampson on our call today, and she's going to be talking about ideas to impact, and we're going to be basically talking about how to become a thought leader, how to find your place and position in the market. And one of her big things is activating change makers. She is the co-founder, CEO, and a executive speaker coach at Talk Boutique. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you, Richard and Kylie. I'm so excited to be here.
Can you maybe start by giving us a little bit of your own background and how you came to do the work that you're doing now as a speaking coach and storyteller and more?
Sure. Sure, thanks. So I spent most of my career in advertising, over 20 years. I worked for some of the largest brands in the world, on some of the largest brands in the world. And what I came to know probably 15 years in was that I was an idealist in a capitalist world. And it wasn't doing me any favors for my own heart of working in that capitalist world. And I started looking around thinking, what could I do that would actually serve my heart as well as my pocket? Because let's face it, we all have to work. And I didn't know what the answer to that was. And I stumbled upon a really, really unique volunteer opportunity. I was asked to be a speaker's coach at TEDxToronto. Now, at the time, I didn't even know what a speaker's coach was. But my job in advertising, I was the VP of strategy for a large agency. And so my whole job was presenting. I would do consumer research. We would understand deeply the behaviors that drove consumers and why they make the buying decisions that they make. And then, of course, because it was advertising, we would look at how we could impact those decisions to make different decisions that we wanted people to make. And, so I would be presenting all the time. And here I was given this opportunity to work with TEDxToronto as a speaker's coach. And I thought, well, look, I present all the time. I get this. I'm sure I'll be fine. And so I started with TEDxToronto, not actually understanding that not only was I being volun-hired, because everything is volunteer in a TEDx event, not only was I volun-hired as a speaker's coach, but I was actually going to be part of the programming team, which meant that I got to choose all of the speakers or be part of the team that chose all of the speakers to be on the stage. And I was suddenly, here I was, a very senior executive in advertising, but suddenly completely out of my depth and thinking, how do I find TED speakers? Well, that first year was a whirlwind. And what happened for me was that I, the idealist, found my people. And what happened was I was given the opportunity to coach some of the smartest people I had ever met in my life. And in doing so, I understood that what my gift is and what I was doing in advertising, which was understanding deeply consumers and humans, really, why we do the things we do, and then taking that core insight and building upon it. Well, that was the perfect training to become a speaker's coach. Because as a speaker's coach, and especially working with these deep subject matter experts, every one of the experts I worked with had an idea that was deep inside of them that they were having a hard time getting out to the world. And my training in advertising was the perfect tool to be able to surface it, articulate it, and say it in such a way that others could understand it, and not only understand it, but understand the impact that that idea could make. And so from there, I said, wow, now this is something that I could actually really spend my life doing. Truthfully, didn't think anyone would ever pay me for it because here I was as a volunteer. And so I actually spent 5 years working, volunteering as a speaker's coach. And after 5 years, um, at the time, my co-founder, who has since left the business, he and I got together and said, do you think somebody would pay for this? Maybe we could make a business out of it. And we said, well, we could focus on all of these TED speakers who we were working with. But beyond the TED speakers we were actually working with, because for every TED speaker who makes it to a TEDx stage, there are 10, 20, 30 more who don't make it, but they're as equally as qualified. It's just that they didn't hit the criteria for that particular event. And so, well, what if we focused only on them? And then we thought, well, here's the thing, that most TED speakers, they're so busy doing the work, they forget to tell anyone about it. And when they don't tell us about it, we get robbed of the opportunity to understand the good work that's happening in the world and the hope that that good work is actually generating. So we decided that we would open Talk Boutique as both a speakers bureau, helping aspiring speakers to get the book, do the video, get that talk down, and be able to present to the world. And we would do that by coaching them and connecting them with the people who could help them make their way throughout the world.
That's awesome. I'm kind of curious. Were you a speaker at the time yourself? And did you do a lot of speaking, or was it more that you came in through the back door and started helping others, and then you yourself became a speaker later? Or how did it work?
It was a total backdoor. At the time, like I said, I was presenting a lot in the corporate world. I was always presenting. And I had spoken, of course, in my industry. Like I said, I was working in marketing and advertising. And so I was often speaking at industry events and well known for that. But it was not something I ever aspired to be, was a speaker. But I got a crash course when I started working with TEDxToronto. That first year, one of the speakers that I worked with was Mark Bowden, who is an expert, who's one of the world's foremost experts on body language. And wow, we talk about kismet in some ways, because what happened was, here I am helping him to develop a narrative that would fit the 18-minute criteria that TED has. But what I was getting was a masterclass in body language and evolutionary psychology that leads us to understand what our body is saying that our words may not be mimicking. And so, so I had all of these amazing opportunities to work with people who taught me so much about the craft that I now am an expert in, which is not only public speaking, but being that expert, being a thought leader, really. And that's really where I've sort of transitioned myself to, is understanding my own thought leadership so that I can actually create hope in the world in my own way.
I'm more of a page storyteller. I help people tell stories in ads and emails and sales pages. And you're so gifted with the stage. What do you see as the primary differences there?
You know what? I actually don't see that there is a difference. But what I will say is that on the page, you get the opportunity to hook people in, maybe with a little bit more, like you have a few more words. On the stage, the biggest difference, and I think it's the hardest difference, is that you have to have courage on the stage to to walk on stage and start with a story, because so many people on the stage right away, they want to say, hi, I'm Andrea Sampson, and I'm here today to tell you about this, this, and this. But as an audience, oh, I don't care about that. I mean, yes, of course I do at a very, rudimentary level. I want to know that the person that's walking on is interesting. But actually what I want is for you to grab me. And it's the same on the page, right? It's the same thing. Like when we try and sell people in an email or in a social post right out of the gates, we just pass that by. No one wants to engage in a sales pitch, but they do want to engage in a story. We want to know what makes this person, this idea, this email, this social post, something that I'm going to spend some of my valuable time on. Because let's face it, we are so inundated right now with everything that our time is the most precious commodity that we have. And so if you're going to entertain me, maybe I'll give you 3 seconds of my time more than if you're just going to try and sell me. And that's all we really have, right?
How do you help people develop hooks? Because they have to have one in that first sentence.
Yeah. So So storytelling is something that's an art. And I know, Kylie, you know this. And on that, from the page to the stage one that you and I did, I think I took people through the story spine. And I've probably evolved it a little bit. But here's the thing that I've come to truly and deeply and very at a visceral level understand about stories is that every story has a moment. There is a moment in every story where we lean in. Now, when we start a story from the place of an emotional impact, so, maybe you start with something that is sensory. I could hear birds chirping and smell fire in the air. Now, right away, we're like, what is that? Birds and fire, right? It draws you in. Now that's using the environment as a hook. You could use a character. She was a crazy woman with pink hair, and she was telling me about storytelling. Again, who is this? So when you intrigue the audience with a moment that seems out of place, and they read it and they know they have to read more. So what you do is you take the story spine, which is just 5 simple elements, and you find the hook in each one of those, and you engage the person. Now, there's another way you can do it, which is you go to the 4th point of the story spine, which we call the raising of the stakes, or it's the tension point, and you start there. And that's an irresistible hook, right? Because suddenly you're in that moment of tension, and you give away the tension point, and then you bring them back. So there are lots of ways you can do it, but I think the thing is that you, as the storyteller, have something that is so unique to you, which is your story. And when you have the courage to use elements of your own story to get the listener or the reader in, what you've done is 2 things. 1, you've hooked them, but 2, you've engaged them emotionally, and you've engaged them with you. And that is powerful.
That's amazing. And I think they've said that speaking on stage is like one of the greatest fears of a lot of people. And I can imagine for a lot of the TEDx speakers that you work with, the stakes are even higher because it's like their life's work and they get their 18 minutes. What are some of the primary things that you've seen that are like the major blocks that you help people get overcome? I'm kind of curious.
So it's so interesting working with people who are deep subject matter experts, or even just people who are passionate about the work they do. Because whether you're a scientist or an academic, or whether you're, like me, sort of an artist at heart who has a really big message, what happens is we all get in our own way. Now, in some cases, it's imposter syndrome. Oh, they're going to find me out. I don't really know what I know. Or in other cases, it's the inner critic. And the inner critic, because the imposter syndrome is the inner critic. But sometimes, like I said, it expresses as imposter. Sometimes it just expresses as the, everybody out there is going to question you. And so, and you don't know enough, or you're not good enough. You get that inner critic playing. And when you're doing a TED Talk, so there's some things about a TED Talk that make it even more stressful. So number 1, the likelihood is you'll have few or no visuals. So for most of us, we've grown up in the world of PowerPoint. And so PowerPoint is our crutch, right? And now the crutch gets taken away from you. So number 1, little or no visuals. Number 2, you now have a limited amount of time, and 18 minutes is what it used to be. Most TED Talks now are 12 minutes or less. So now your life's work condensed into 10 minutes. Holy cow, that's a lot of pressure. And then number 3, you got to remember the entire script, because most TED Talks are memorized. And because you've got 10 minutes and every word is valuable. And so you don't have the luxury of being able to sort of back your way into what it is you want to say, which is what most of us do. So what happens with a TED speaker often is they get in their own head and they can't get, first of all, that idea out. And then number 2, they believe that they're not the right person to present that idea when they do find it, because that inner critic just rears up. It becomes a dragon in front of them and it stops them. And so as a speaker's coach, I am, what I have to do is first of all, help them to get the idea out, and then be the cheerleader that says, not only are you the right person, you are the person who's going to do this. And so it's a little bit of a psychology, but it's mostly just really validating people, because what I've come to understand is that we all know more than we think we do. And we're all far better than we think we are. And so my job is to mirror that back. I'm not trying to placate or flatter anyone, because that's the worst thing I can do as a speaker's coach. But what I do is I mirror back to them what I see, because we all see through the lens of our inner critic. But what I see, because I'm now looking at you, I see what comes out. And so when I mirror it back to you, and and having done this with so many speakers, they are moved to a point of an emotional response, because they don't see themselves. And when they do, it's powerful. And so with a TED speaker, especially, it's really important that they see themselves through those uncritical eyes, but through the eyes of appreciation. Because here's the thing, when you stand up in front of a TED audience, oh, they love you. They want you to succeed. It is the most welcoming audience you'll ever step in front of. And so, but of course, when you're the one on stage, that's not what you believe. You believe they're going to judge you. And so I've got to get them over that hurdle.
It seems to me like the people that you work with are having to tell a new story. And is that any more challenging? In what ways is that more challenging than sort of telling maybe a good story, maybe an interesting story, but not a story?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Like I work with some of the smartest people in the world, and I often feel so incredibly privileged to do what I do. And what I find when I'm working with somebody who is like right out there on the cutting edge, and I mean, some of the stuff that we work on, it sounds like science fiction, quite frankly. And so what happens is two things. One is that that person, because they have to be so in it, they don't see it as being cutting edge. Because they're living even further out, right? And so they're like, oh no, but so and so is doing more than me. Or so there's always somebody, of course, always somebody who's doing more. And so what I need to do is to help them to see how far out they are from the rest of us. Because I got to bring them back. I don't want them to lose the work they're doing, but I got to connect it with the rest of us who are not quite in that same place. And then the second thing I've got to do, so once I get them back and go, okay, because look, what you're doing is amazing. So first of all, let's just sit there in this moment and look at what you're doing. So I help them to see their work through the eyes of the rest of us. Then the second thing is, okay, now we've got to make it understandable. And the way that we do that and is we work with analogy and metaphor. And which, by the way, working with scientists, that's not an easy thing. They don't believe in metaphor and analogy, right? Like, it's like that is trained out of them, because that is not facts. Those are things that scientists don't like. But the reality is, analogy and metaphor is the way in which it connects to the rest of us. And it's the way in which we emotionally are able to digest it, right? Because okay, it's great that blockchain exists as an example. And for most of us, our experience of blockchain is cryptocurrency. And yes, that's interesting. Okay, so it's a new way to actually spend money or to retain money. Great. But the reality is blockchain is far more than cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is only the first generation or the first iteration of how blockchain will impact our world. Because what blockchain is actually a new coding platform upon which everything is built. And it's uber safe because of the way in which that coding protocol has been built. So that sounds really complex. But what it really means is it decentralizes our entire world. So think about countries. We live in a somewhat centralized geographical environment where we have a centralized government who makes decisions for us. And we, as the populace, are at the effect of those decisions. Well, in a blockchain-enabled governing society, that gets flipped on its head, because now each one of us has the ability to create impact at a governance level, because we're actually holding on to all the pieces of ourselves that go into the society within which we are being governed. And so we have a voice that has a direct access to it. And so helping people to understand the centralized versus decentralized world of blockchain is a big thing to understand. And so you start to find the analogies and the metaphors that help people to see that. How are you flipping something that's centralized to decentralized? So the use of the English language, because I work mostly in English, is really a big part of the work that I do, and helping scientists to really access not just metaphor and analogy, but in what I call emotional language, which really good old Aristotle came up with back in God only knows when, which is actually rhetoric, which we all tend to think is a bad thing. But I got to tell you, it is the most powerful tools we have in our language, is being able to use emotions to persuade or inform. And that's what rhetoric is.
I think it's so interesting, and there's so many new technologies and ideas that are emerging right now. And even for blockchain, there's probably thousands of blockchain experts out there, or it could be meditation or yoga or any kind of art. How do you help people become the go-to person in their industry, become like a thought leader and stand out? Because I think a lot of people will be like, well, I don't know how to stand out and differentiate myself in this crowded market.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we talk about transforming experts and change makers into thought leaders by helping them to become storytellers that helps us to understand the work they're doing in the world so that they can make the impact that they want to make. That is sort of what we at Talk Boutique talk a lot about. So how do you do that? Well, you start off with, and let me break that down. So what is a thought leader? Well, a thought leader is really a combination of three things. One, they're an expert communicator. They're able to communicate in a way that we understand and are moved by. If you think of any leader who is a good leader, you'll see underneath it that they actually communicate better than any other person that you know. So a thought leader, first of all, is an expert communicator. Number two, they have a personal brand that we connect with or align with. They have created a persona for themselves that we see and connect with emotionally. They're usually in integrity with who they are and what they value. So we're seeing the alignment between their personal values and how they show up in the world. And the third thing is that they have a community of people, or a community of others that believe in what they're saying and support what they're saying. And they know that they have a community, and they curate that community. And when you are an expert communicator who is in alignment with your values, and you speak to a community of individuals who believe in what you're saying, that's where you create impact. And that's what a thought leader is. So how do you do that? Well, let's start off with my area of expertise, which is communications. So first, you have to become that expert communicator. You need to communicate in such a way that others not only hear what you're saying and engage with what you're saying, but actually are so moved that they actually want to do things differently, that they either want to take your lead and follow you and do the things that you suggest. So think in the area of climate change as an example. Think of the thought leaders in climate change. We need them to help us understand how we need to change. And so they need to be persuasive in the way in which they're communicating, and clear so we understand it. So now, I suggest that the best way to do that is through story, because when you're using a story, it becomes your analogy or your metaphor. Suddenly, not only are we connecting on that, that rational level of climate change requires change, but now when I understand the story that goes along with that, now I'm emotionally invested in you as the teller of that story, and me as the receiver of that story, and I understand how I can impact that. So being that professional communicator means understanding how to use story in a way to impact people. Now, the personal brand, first of all, as a thought leader, you need to understand what are your core values. Absolutely essential. And now make sure that you're showing up with those. So if you haven't gone through a values exercise, that's the first thing I would suggest you do. And I work with so many thought leaders where even in the work that we do together, we start to uncover their values. And I often will say to them, you should work with a branding expert to help you on that, because I think it's really important. And then the community piece. Now, building a community, some people are like, well, oh, I don't want to build a community. Oh my God, that feels so inauthentic. And I disagree, because communities are absolutely the best place to use your thought leadership. And sometimes communities are built just by you being the leader, and people come and they want to follow you because they believe in what you're saying. Well, give them a place to meet. You could be creating a Facebook community. Look, it doesn't really matter. It could be that you're creating a community of thought leaders who physically meet. It could be that it's a conference. But the point is, you understand who your community is and how you can keep going back to that community and building it and allowing them to interact with each other as well as with you.
For people who are listening and getting super excited about everything, which I'm sure they are, what are some of the buildings they can start to put their own story together?
Sure. And so I'll go back through the story spine because it's so much fun. And I think it's the place where so many of us really need a framework, and the story spine. And by the way, happy to offer this as a little tool for anybody who wants it. We have it's a framework called the story spine, which, by the way, I won't take any credit on having built it. It is something that's been in the market for many, many years. I believe there was somebody in the 80s who started it. What we've done is we've taken the story spine and built our own way of using it. So there is some proprietary pieces to it, but it is a piece that's out there. But we have a tool, and I would love to offer it to your listeners. If anybody wants it, they can go on our website, and we have it as a free download. So it's called the story spine. So what it is a five-part framework to building a story. So all stories have 5 things. And again, having said, one more piece of preamble, there are so many different storytelling frameworks, and all of them work. But again, it comes down to the application. And why I like the story spine, especially when it comes to speaking, is that it's easy. It doesn't require many steps. It's only 5 elements. And so it's quick, and you can get there pretty easily, and you can remember it. So having said that, the 5 elements: the environment. The environment is the sense of place. It is where you're bringing your listener. So when you're thinking about an environment, you want specificity. So it's not a tree, it's an oak. You want to use sensory language. So, tell me, what is the smell of pine in the air? Tell me the sound of the crackling as we are walking down that path with the leaves underfoot. You can, and I'm sure as you're listening to me right now, you can see that. Your brain is giving you those images. And why this is important is because what we're doing is we're starting to engage the brain, and we're getting the listener engaged. So the environment is the sense of place. Bring us into the story. Don't tell it as a third person. Tell it as if you are in it. So sense of place. Next one is characters. So number 2, characters are people, or they could be inanimate objects as well, but they have names. And so they have backstories. So when you're telling a story, I'm not just talking about my friend. I'm talking about my friend Kylie, who happens to be a very good storyteller and a podcast host. Now that's a little bit of a backstory. That's all I might need, enough that the listener now gets a sense of Kylie. I might even say Kylie has beautiful blonde hair and big eyes. And so now you get a sense, you're getting a picture. So we're in the woods, and it's pine is in the air, and the crinkling of leaves underfoot. And Kylie and I are walking down this beautiful path, and we know a little bit about Kylie, and we can actually see this, right? So you're telling a story. So you've got the environment, you've got the characters. Now you've got the issue or the opportunity. Now this is the reason you're telling the story. This is where a lot of times the stories start, but it's the worst place to start because you give it away. So you want to lead up to that issue or opportunity. Maybe the reason I'm telling the story is that I'm telling you about my friend Kylie, who I haven't seen in ages, and we finally got together to take this walk in the woods. And so we're reconnecting. Now, the fourth piece is the piece where this is where often you get a real lean in moment, because the fourth piece is what we call the raising of the stakes. And what that is it's the point of tension. This is the and then moment in the story. And when we're telling stories as a storyteller, this is the point we want to lead to it, but we have to not go there too quickly. We want to set it up. We want to bring the listener in. So the and then moment is when something even bigger happens. So maybe in this story, Kylie and I, who hadn't seen each other in months, are finally getting together for this walk in the woods, and it's a beautiful day. And then suddenly it started pouring down rain. Oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Now, you can keep these and then moments going, because as you can see, now you go, oh God, what are they going to do? And then you go, and then the the GPS on their phone went out, and they're in the middle of the woods and they're lost. And now me and Kylie are getting drenched in the middle of the woods. We actually don't know how to get back because we had been using our GPS to kind of guide us through. Well, what's going to happen now? What happens here is really you can go to an outcome, right? That's the easy way. But if you're telling a story at the beginning of a talk, or even for an advertisement, let's say it's an email, you don't give the end. You kind of leave the listener there. And what you're doing now, because what we really want to do is imbue an idea into that story. I tell you this because what I want you to know is that satellite radio, I don't know, I'm trying to find an idea to put into this, but right there you could say, I want you to know the importance of making sure that you have connectivity no matter where you are. And our product is going to give you that connectivity. Let's say that this was an ad. You could insert it right there. You could then go on to support it, but bring the story all the way through it. So what you've done, you've brought me into a story with the environment, with the characters, with the issue or opportunity, and with the raising of the stakes. And now what you've done is you've inserted an idea at a critical point where me as the listener is very engaged. You've delivered your idea, and then you end the story eventually, but you bring them back to it. So that is a very simple framework for telling a story, but a very powerful way to engage your audience.
It's so good. I love it. Thank you for all your generosity today. I know you work with a lot of high-level companies. You got a lot going on, and you spent this time with us, and I just feel very blessed by that. And I'm curious if you just have any imparting wisdom, or parting wisdom, I should say, for the listeners today.
Sure. I think the thing that I say to people, and I continue to say it, you are powerful. Every person listening to this podcast, you have an idea, and the world needs your idea. And so your idea might change one person's life, or it might change a whole community's lives, or it might change a whole nation's lives. But you have an idea, and don't be shy. Figure out what that idea is, articulate it, and tell others. Don't be afraid to use your voice. It is the most powerful tool you have. And the way in which you can use your voice, even if you're still searching for your idea, tell your story. Your story is beautiful, it's unique, it's powerful, and it's impactful. So I want to hear your story, and I hope you'll share it.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And if people want to find out more about you, they can go to your website, and that's talkboutique.com. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, talkboutique.com.
And they can sign up for the gift of the that you offered on the show. We really appreciate your time here. I know that one of your missions is to activate change makers in the world. So that's amazing. We really appreciate you. And for listeners, if you're listening to on Spotify or iTunes, you can also get the show notes, and we'll also post the links to her website and to that gift on consciousmarketer.com. Just click podcasts and you can find this episodes. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks, Andrea.